Zerovil stepped off the transport shuttle and took her first breath of Earth air. It smelled different from the filtered atmosphere of her homeworld, richer, messier, filled with countless particles her sensory organs could barely process. Much like humans themselves, she thought, the Armstrong Space Development Center stretched before her, a sprawling complex of buildings that lacked the clean geometric precision of Thoraxian architecture. Humans built things the way they thought. In all directions at once, a woman with short gray hair approached, hand extended in the human greeting gesture. Zerovil carefully extended her upper limb, mimicking the motion she had studied. "Commander Ellen Wright," the woman said. "Welcome to Armstrong. We're honored to have a Thoraxian engineer of your reputation join our exchange program." "The honor is mine," Zerovil replied, her translator device giving her words a slight metallic edge. "I have studied human vessels for many cycles." "They are interesting," Commander Wright smiled. "That's one word for them. Most of your kind call them inefficient." "They are inefficient," Zerovil stated plainly. "Yet they succeed where more advanced designs fail. This is the puzzle I wish to solve." They walked through the main entrance, passing humans who tried not to stare at Zerovil's tall, slender form and iridescent blue skin. Her forearms were kept neatly folded in the formal Thoraxian posture, though she noticed how the humans around her moved with loose, unpredictable gestures. "I've assigned you to work with Alan Porter, Commander," Wright explained as they entered a large, open workspace filled with holographic displays and cluttered desks. "He's one of our best, though his methods might seem unusual to you." A man with dark skin and curly hair looked up from a workstation. His desk was covered with physical models, empty food containers, and what appeared to be children's drawings, pinned to a board. "Alan, meet Zerovil, our Thoraxian exchange engineer." Alan stood and smiled widely. "The designer of the Stellar Horizon? I studied your engine configuration for months. The way you solved the quantum flux issue was brilliant." Zerovil felt a surge of pride. "You are familiar with my work?" "Everyone in propulsion engineering knows your designs," Alan said, "though we had to modify your cooling system approach when we adapted it. Turns out human maintenance crews need a bit more space to move around than your specs allowed for." "A less efficient use of space," Zerovil noted. "But more efficient repairs when things go wrong," Alan countered with a friendly shrug. "Anyway, I'm glad you're here. We're starting work on a new deep space vessel, and your input will be valuable." "Commander." Wright left them to get acquainted, and Alan showed Zerovil to a workstation prepared for her. It was larger than the others, accommodating her height and multiple limbs. A small touch that surprised her. "I notice your facility lacks organization," Zerovil observed, looking at the seemingly random arrangement of the workspace. "On Thorax, each engineering division is physically separated and arranged according to workflow efficiency." Alan laughed. "We tried that once. Engineers stopped talking to each other. Now we jumble everyone together so ideas can bounce around. Gets messy, but it works." "Inefficient," Zerovil said again. "You keep using that word," Alan smiled. "Come on, let me show." "You the current project?" He led her to a large holographic display showing the skeleton of a starship design. Zerovil immediately noticed dozens of flaws, power conduits with unnecessary curves, living quarters spread throughout the vessel rather than centralized, and an entire section labeled Recreation. "Why waste valuable space on recreation?" she asked. "Humans need it," Alan said simply. "Especially on long missions. Thoraxian crews function for years without recreation spaces. And how often do they succeed on unexpected mission parameters?" "When things go wrong?" Alan asked, not unkindly. Zerovil hesitated. This was precisely the question that had brought her to Earth. Thoraxian ships were marvels of engineering. Yet in crisis situations, human vessels showed a surprising advantage in crew survival and mission completion. "I wish to understand this discrepancy," she admitted. "Great, but first coffee." Alan gestured toward a small alcove where several humans were gathered around a machine emitting a strong aroma. "Coffee? Human fuel," Alan explained. "Not as efficient as whatever keeps you going, but it's how we start the day." Throughout that first day, Zerval observed the human engineers with growing confusion. They took frequent breaks. They engaged in conversation unrelated to their work. They displayed images of family members at their workstations. One engineer even had a small plant on her desk, a living organism with no engineering purpose whatsoever. Most puzzling was their approach to problem solving. When facing a design challenge with the new ship's shield harmonics, the team gathered in what they called a brainstorming session. Instead of applying established formulas and known solutions, they proposed ideas that were clearly impossible, made jokes, and somehow emerged with 3 potential approaches to test. Why not simply use the standard configurations? Zerval asked Alan after the meeting. Standard gets you standard results, he replied, scratching notes on an actual piece of paper, another inefficiency that baffled her. We're trying to build something that can handle the unknown. The unknown cannot be calculated for, she stated. Exactly. Alan looked at her with unexpected delight as if she had made his point for him. So we build in adaptability instead? Systems that can be repurposed, spaces that can change function, and crews who can think creatively because they're not stressed to their breaking point. At the end of the day, Zerval returned to her assigned quarters to compile her observations. The human approach to engineering defied Thraxian principles at every turn. They prioritized adaptability over efficiency, comfort over function, and maintained social bonds that seemed to have no direct relationship to their work performance, yet something about their methods nagged at her. The historical data was clear. In standard conditions, Thraxian vessels outperformed human ships in every metric. But when faced with unexpected challenges, spatial anomalies, enemy attacks, system failures, human crews showed a remarkable ability to survive and adapt. She reviewed the design for the new ship again. The recreation spaces, the larger crew quarters, the communal dining area, all represented significant sacrifices in potential power output, storage capacity, and defensive capabilities. What benefit do these provide that outweighs their cost? She wondered aloud. The next morning, Zerval arrived early at the facility, determined to observe more closely. She found Alan already there, making modifications to a power distribution node. You work before standard hours? She asked, surprised. Had an idea in the shower, he explained. Couldn't wait to try it. In the ... shower. Yeah, best ideas always. Come when you're not thinking about work. He looked up from his model. That's another human thing, I guess. Our brains keep working on problems even when we're focused elsewhere. Zerval watched him work, noting how his hands moved with both precision and a kind of intuition that didn't follow any pattern she could discern. There was something about the human approach she was missing, something that might explain why their seemingly flawed designs performed so well when it mattered most. I wish to learn more about this human approach, she said finally. Not just observe, but understand, Alan smiled. That's why you're here, isn't it? To figure out our secret? Yes, Zerval admitted. My kind designs starships to perfection? Yet your imperfect ships often succeed where ours fail. This contradiction requires investigation. Well, Alan said, putting down his tools, then let's get started. And I promise by the time you leave Earth, you'll understand exactly what makes human ships work. Zerval felt an unfamiliar sensation, anticipation mixed with uncertainty. It was not a feeling Thraxians cultivated, but here, among humans, perhaps it was appropriate. I look forward to the experience, she said, and meant it. A week passed at the Armstrong Space Development Center. Zerval adapted to the human schedule, though she found their need for 8 hours of sleep inefficient compared to the brief rest periods of her species. Still, she was determined to understand their methods. Today, Alan had called a brainstorming session for the new deep space exploration vessel. Zerval arrived early and found the meeting room already filling with engineers. Someone had brought round pastries that filled the air with a sweet smell. Try one, said Susan Miller, pushing a box toward Zerval. They're donuts, brain food. Zerval carefully selected one and took a small bite. Her taste receptors were overwhelmed by sugar and fat. This provides mental stimulation? She asked. Susan laughed. Not exactly, but it makes the meeting more fun. Fun, another human concept that seemed to have no place in engineering. Yet they insisted on it. Alan arrived carrying large cups of coffee for everyone, including a special one for Zerovil with a milder blend she had found tolerable. She noted this consideration, how humans remembered individual preferences and adjusted for them. Okay, team, Alan began, projecting the ship design onto the wall. Today we're focusing on crew spaces. The mission profile calls for a 2-year deep space exploration with a crew of 20. Zerovil studied the current design. The crew quarters are excessive, she observed. On a Thoraxian vessel, spaces would be 30% smaller with shared rest areas. Humans need personal space, Susan explained. Especially on long missions. Without it, crew psychology suffers. We learned this the hard way, Alan added. Early space stations had minimal personal space. Crew conflicts increased dramatically. After 6 months, Zerovil made a note. Psychology affects performance? Enormously, said engineer Paul Wright, who specialized in life support systems. I worked on the Jupiter mission. When they added private communication booths for crew to talk with family, mission effectiveness improved by 22%. This was measurable data, something Zerovil could understand. So these inefficiencies serve a psychological function. That improves overall mission success? Exactly. Alan looked pleased. Now you're getting it. The meeting continued, and Zerovil watched as the team discussed adding a hydroponics garden to the ship. We don't need it for oxygen recycling. Susan explained. The mechanical systems handle that. But having growing things around helps crew mental health. Plants serve an emotional purpose? Zerovil asked. Plants, art, music, movies, all of it, Paul said. Humans need sensory variety and connection to living things. After the meeting, Zerovil retreated to her workstation to analyze what she had learned. She pulled up performance data on human vessels throughout history, focusing on crisis response scenarios. The pattern was striking. Ships with more comfort elements consistently showed better outcomes when faced with unexpected challenges. A correlation was too strong to ignore, yet it contradicted everything Thoraxian engineering valued. Alan approached as she studied the data. Finding anything interesting? Yes, your inefficient designs appear to be deliberately inefficient. They serve purposes I had not considered. Alan pulled up a chair. Want to know a secret? Humans are terrible at working like machines. We get bored, distracted, irritable. But we're amazing at solving unexpected problems, especially when we feel connected to each other and comfortable in our environment. Zerovil considered this. Thoraxians value consistency and precision. We design our ships and crews to function as perfect systems. And when everything goes according to plan, that works brilliantly, Alan acknowledged. But space exploration rarely goes according to plan. That evening, Zerovil received an unexpected invitation from Susan to join several engineers for dinner at a restaurant. Her first instinct was to decline. Social gatherings had no place in work relationships on Thorax. But she was here to understand humans, so she accepted. The restaurant was loud and filled with smells. The engineers ordered different foods and shared them around the table. They talked about work, but also about their families, a sporting event, and a musical performance someone had attended. How long have you been designing ships? Greg Foster asked Zerovil as they ate. 43 standard years, she replied. I began my training as a juvenile. Do you enjoy it? Susan asked. The question confused Zerovil. Enjoyment is not relevant. I excel at it. It is my function. The humans exchanged glances. On Earth, Alan explained gently, most people choose work they enjoy. It helps us do better at our jobs. You choose based on emotional response rather than aptitude? Zerovil was shocked. Both, ideally, Greg said. I love solving propulsion problems. The feeling when a design finally works is amazing. Feeling, Zerovil repeated. This seemed to be at the core of human design philosophy, this attention to emotional states and subjective experiences. The next day, Zerovil approached Commander Wright with a proposal. I wish to conduct an experiment, she explained. Vessel design that combines Thraxian technical excellence with human comfort elements. Commander Wright looked intrigued. A hybrid approach? That could be valuable for both our species. I require a small team. Alan Porter and perhaps Susan Miller. Approved, Wright said. We can assign you Resource Bay 4. It's smaller, but has good simulation equipment. Zeravel began work immediately. She started with a standard Thraxian scout ship design, elegant, efficient, and precisely calibrated. Then she began to modify it, incorporating human elements that seemed most connected to crisis performance. Alan and Susan joined her, offering suggestions that often made Zeravel uncomfortable. They wanted curves where straight lines were more efficient. They suggested variable lighting that mimicked Earth's day cycle. They insisted on a small communal area for meals. The ship is only designed for a crew of 6 on short-range missions, Zeravel protested. Why waste space on shared dining? Because humans think better together, Alan explained. Some of our best problem-solving happens over meals. When Zeravel designed the crew chairs based on perfect ergonomic calculations, Susan sat in the prototype and frowned. This is technically perfect but feels like sitting on a rock, she complained. It needs give, texture, something that feels friendly to human bodies. Chairs should feel friendly. Zeravel was baffled. Everything on the ship should feel like it was made for us, not just to contain us, Alan explained. That's the difference. Thraxian ships feel like perfect machines. Human ships feel like homes. Homes. The concept struck Zeravel deeply. Thraxians did not form emotional attachments to places the way humans did. Their dwellings were functional, not emotional centers. That weekend, Susan invited Zeravel to visit her home. Curious about this concept, Zeravel accepted. Susan's dwelling was small by Thraxian standards, but filled with objects that seemed to have no purpose. Pictures on walls, soft fabrics covering furniture, small decorative items on shelves. Why? Do you keep these non-functional items? Zeravel asked, examining a small stone figure. That's from my first trip to Mexico, Susan explained. It reminds me of that experience. Most things here have memories attached to them. Zeravel looked around with new understanding. Your home is a physical manifestation of your personal history. Exactly. And our ships need a bit of that too. When humans are surrounded by cold, purely functional design, we feel connected. When our surroundings have personal meaning, we function better. Returning to the center on Monday, Zeravel redesigned the crew quarters of their experimental vessel. She added small display areas for personal items. She incorporated materials with pleasant tactile properties. She adjusted lighting to create a sense of warmth. Alan noticed the changes immediately. You're getting it, he said with approval. I am attempting to understand, Zeravel corrected. The human need for emotional connection to surroundings is still foreign to me, but I can see its effects in the data. As the design progressed, Zeravel found herself increasingly curious about this uniquely human approach. She began to wonder if there might be aspects of it that could benefit her own kind. Despite their different psychology, the answer she suspected would emerge when their hybrid vessel faced its first real challenge. The experimental vessel took shape over the next 3 weeks. Zeravel worked long hours, often staying at the center when most humans had gone home. She was determined to create something that would test her growing theory about human design. Philosophy. One evening, as she adjusted the environmental controls in the ship's common area, she noticed Alan was still there, working at his station. You exceed standard work hours, she observed. Alan looked up and smiled. So do you. Guess. We're both curious about how this turns out. I am performing my function, Zeravel said. Why do you remain? Alan thought for a moment. Because I care about this project. It matters to me personally. Personal investment affects work performance? For humans, absolutely. Alan stood and stretched. Want to see something? Might help explain. He led her to a different section of the center she hadn't visited before. It was a large room filled with old ship models and display cases. This is our museum, Alan explained. Every successful vessel we've designed has a place here. Zerval examined the models with interest. She noticed something odd. Each display included not just technical specifications, but stories. Crew accounts of missions, personal logs, even photographs of the humans who had lived aboard these vessels. Why include non-technical information? She asked. Because ships aren't just machines to us, Alan said. They're part of our story. Look at this one. He pointed to an older model, a simple exploration vessel, the Pioneer. Not our most advanced design, but when it got caught in an ion storm, the crew reconfigured the galley power systems to boost the shields. They survived because Chef Kelly knew exactly how much power her cooking equipment used and realized it could be redirected. Zeraval tilted her head. A food preparation specialist contributed to survival? Everyone contributes on human ships, Alan said. That's why we train all crew members to understand basic systems, why we encourage people to personalize their spaces, to build relationships. When crisis hits, that web of knowledge and connection becomes our strength. Zeraval considered this as they walked back to the work area. Thoraxian crews function as perfect units. Each member performs their assigned task with precision, and if something happens to one crew member, they are replaced by another trained for the same function, Alan nodded. That works in predictable situations. But what happens when you face something no one was trained for? That question stayed with Zeraval as she continued work on their ship. She had named it Convergence in her reports, a meeting point of Thoraxian and human design philosophies. The next day, Commander Wright called them to her office. With her was a human Zeraval hadn't met before, a woman with dark skin and short black hair wearing a pilot's uniform. This is Lieutenant Olivia Chun, Wright introduced. One of our best test pilots. Olivia extended her hand, and Zeraval carefully returned the greeting gesture she had now practiced many times. Your experimental vessel is ready for testing, Wright continued. We've scheduled a series of simulation runs next week, followed by a short orbital test if all goes well. Will Lieutenant Chin be piloting? Zeraval asked. I requested this. Assignment specifically, Olivia said. I've studied Thoraxian control systems, and I'm curious about your hybrid approach. I would like to observe these tests directly, Zeraval said. Of course, Wright agreed. You, Alan, and Susan will join Olivia for the orbital test, along with engineers Joe Rivera and Lisa Wong to round out the test crew. A test crew of 6, exactly what the Convergence was designed for. Zeraval felt an unfamiliar sensation that took her a moment to identify. It was eagerness, anticipation. She was looking forward to seeing her creation tested. The simulation runs began 3 days later. Zeraval watched as Olivia navigated the ship through increasingly complex scenarios. The Thoraxian systems performed with expected precision, but what interested Zeraval more was how the human crew interacted with the environment she had created. They moved through the ship differently than Thoraxians would. They touched walls as they passed, adjusted their seats constantly, and personalized their stations with small items, a photo, a small plant, a colorful control marker. During rest periods, they gathered in the common area rather than remaining at their stations. They prepared food together and engaged in what they called small talk, conversation with no clear purpose. The crew seems to be functioning inefficiently, Zeraval observed to Alan during one such break. Watch what happens in the next simulation, he suggested. The next test was a crisis scenario, multiple system failures during an asteroid field transit. Zeraval expected chaos, but what she saw surprised her. The crew moved with surprising coordination. Without being instructed, Lisa left her engineering station to help Joe when his systems overloaded. Olivia called out suggestions based on her previous experience with similar situations. Susan quickly adapted the life support settings to compensate. For power losses, they were functioning not as separate units but as a connected whole, sharing information and adapting to changing conditions. Impressive, Zeraval admitted when the simulation ended successfully. That's the human factor, Alan said. Those inefficient conversations? They were building trust, learning each other's strengths, forming connections. When crisis hit, those connections became pathways for instant cooperation. The day of the orbital test arrived. The Convergence was loaded onto a transport and taken to the launch facility. Zervil felt oddly protective of the vessel as ground crews prepared it for. Launch Commander Wright met them at the preparation area. "All systems check out," she reported. "You're cleared for a 72-hour orbital test, focusing on crew functionality and system integration." The crew boarded, each taking their assigned station. Zervil was not a pilot or engineer in this scenario. She was there to observe. She took a seat in the common area where she could watch all crew interactions. Launch went smoothly. The Thoraxian propulsion system performed perfectly, guiding them into a stable orbit with minimal fuel consumption. But Zervil was more interested in watching the humans. They moved through their tasks with confidence, but also with something else: pleasure. They seemed to enjoy interacting with the ship she had helped design. The environmental controls are responsive, Lisa commented, adjusting the temperature in her work area. "It feels like the ship is listening to us." "The control interface is intuitive," Olivia added from the pilot's seat. "Combines Thoraxian precision with human-friendly feedback." As the hours passed, Zervil observed how the crew settled into the space. They used the common area during breaks, prepared meals together, and even played a simple card game during their rest period. On the second day, Alan found Zervil making notes in her observation area. "What do you think so far?" he asked. "The integration of Thoraxian and human design elements is functioning adequately," she said. "But I have not yet observed how it would perform in a true crisis." As if responding to her words, an alarm suddenly blared through the ship. "Unidentified object approaching," Olivia called from the bridge. "Moving fast on intercept course." The real test of the Convergence was about to begin. The crew rushed to their stations as the alarm continued to sound. Zervil moved to the bridge where Olivia was tracking the approaching object. "Can you identify it?" Alan asked, taking the second pilot's seat. Olivia shook her head. "Too small for accurate reading at this distance? But it's moving too fast to be natural. Thoraxian sensors should be able to provide more detail," Zervil said, moving to the sensor array she had designed. She adjusted several settings, focusing the powerful senses on the small object. The display clarified, showing a familiar shape. Zervil felt her inner membranes flutter with recognition. "It is a Thoraxian vessel," she announced, "a science probe. But something is wrong with its flight pattern." The small Thoraxian ship was moving erratically, its trajectory suggesting damaged navigation systems. As it came closer, more information appeared on their screens. "It's sending a distress signal," Susan reported from the communications station. "On Thoraxian frequencies. Can you translate?" Alan asked. Zervil moved to assist Susan. Together they decoded the message, which was repeating on a loop. "Science vessel, precise inquiry requests emergency assistance," Zervil translated. "Severe system damage after encountering spatial anomaly. 4 crew members aboard. Life support failing." Commander Wright's voice came through their communication. "System from Earth. We're tracking the situation. There are no other vessels close enough to assist. Convergence, you are authorized to attempt rescue if you assess it's within your capabilities." Alan looked at Zervil. "Your call. Can our hybrid ship handle this?" Zervil considered the situation. The Convergence was only a test vessel, not fully equipped for rescue operations. But the Thoraxian crew would die without help. "We must attempt assistance," she decided. "The Thoraxian vessel has superior technical capabilities but appears to have suffered catastrophic systems failure. Our vessel, while less advanced, may be more adaptable to this emergency." Olivia nodded and adjusted their course to intercept the damaged ship. "Approach vector calculated. We'll reach them in 27 minutes." Joe and Lisa began preparing the ship's systems for rescue operations. Susan maintained communication attempts with the Thoraxian vessel but received no response beyond the automated distress call. "They may be in stasis to conserve oxygen," Zervil explained. "Standard Thoraxian protocol when life support is compromised." As they approached, they got their first visual of the Thraxian vessel. It was sleek and perfectly proportioned, a typical example of Thraxian design. But now its hull showed damage from some kind of energy discharge, and its movement was uncontrolled. "We need to stabilize it before we can dock," Olivia said. "I can match its rotation, but we'll need to grab it somehow." "The ship has no external grappling equipment," Zerovol pointed out. "It would be considered an inefficient addition to a Thraxian design," Alan thought for a moment. "What about the maintenance drones? Could we reprogram them to act as external anchors?" Joe nodded excitedly. "We could. They're designed for external hull repair. If we linked them together, they could form a makeshift tether." This was not what the maintenance drones were designed for. On Thorax, equipment was used only for its designated purpose. But Zerovol was learning that humans excelled at improvisation. "Proceed," she said. Joe and Lisa quickly reprogrammed 3 small maintenance drones. Olivia maneuvered the Convergence alongside the spinning Thraxian vessel, and the drones were deployed. They attached to the damaged ship's hull and began to counter its rotation, gradually stabilizing it. "Nicely done," Alan said as the ships aligned. "Now for docking." Another problem presented itself. "The docking mechanisms are not compatible," Zerovol observed. The Thraxian ship used a different connection standard than Earth vessels. Susan studied the schematics. "We can create an adapter using parts from the emergency repair kit. It won't be pretty, but it should hold atmosphere." Again, Zerovol was surprised by this flexible thinking. A Thraxian engineer would have deemed the mission impossible due to incompatible systems. These humans simply found a way to make incompatible things work together. While Susan and Joe built the makeshift adapter, Zerovol used the sensors to scan the interior of the Thraxian vessel. "4 life signs confirmed," she reported. "Weak, but stable. The internal temperature is dropping. Their main power system appears to be offline." After 40 minutes of intensive work, they achieved a seal between the 2 vessels. Zerovol prepared to board the Thraxian ship with Alan and Lisa, while Olivia, Susan, and Joe remained to monitor the Convergence. "Atmosphere is thin but breathable," Zerovol reported as they entered through the makeshift airlock. "Temperature is 14 degrees below optimal." The interior of the Thraxian vessel was dark, lit only by emergency lighting. Everything was arranged with perfect efficiency, no wasted space, no comfort elements. It was exactly what Zerovol was used to, yet after weeks on human vessels, it felt strangely sterile. They found the 4 Thraxian crew members in the main control room. As Zerovol had predicted, they were in emergency stasis pods, their metabolic functions slowed to conserve oxygen. "They need to be revived carefully," she explained to Alan and Lisa. "Their systems are more sensitive to temperature changes than human bodies." Working together, they began the revival process. As the first Thraxian regained consciousness, he looked at Zerovol with recognition of a fellow species, then at the humans with surprise. "I am Science Leader Krender of the Precise Inquiry," he said formally. "You have our gratitude for this rescue." Zerovol introduced herself and the humans, explaining their experimental vessel and mission. "What caused your ship's damage?" she asked as they revived the other crew members. "We were studying a spatial anomaly when it released an unexpected energy pulse," Krender explained. "Our systems were optimized for standard conditions. When multiple systems failed simultaneously, the crew could not adapt quickly enough. We were forced into emergency protocols." Alan and Lisa were examining the Thraxian ship's systems. "The power distribution network is completely fried," Lisa reported. "And the life support backup has maybe 2 hours left." "Can we transfer them to our vessel?" Alan asked. Zerovol hesitated. The Convergence was not designed to support 7 Thraxians and 6 humans. "Then we need to fix their ship," Lisa said simply. "At least enough to get them home," Krender shook his head. "Impossible. Required replacement components are not available." "We don't need exact replacements," Alan said, already examining the damaged power system. "We just need to get creative." The Thraxians watched with confusion as the humans began an impromptu redesign of their ship's systems. Lisa suggested using parts from non-essential systems to repair critical ones. Joe proposed linking the two ships' power grids with a temporary bridge made from communication equipment. What most surprised Ziravel was how the humans included the Thraxian crew in their plans, asking questions about the ship's design and incorporating their specialized knowledge. "This approach is not standard," Krender said quietly to Ziravel as they watched the humans work. "They alter the purpose of components. They combine systems never meant to interact." "Yes," Ziravel agreed. "And it is why they may succeed where our methods would fail." For the first time, she was seeing her two worlds collide, Thraxian technical precision meeting human adaptability. And in that moment, she began to truly understand what she had been missing in her designs all these years. For 12 intense hours, the combined human and Thraxian crew worked to save the damaged science vessel. The humans moved with creative energy, trying solutions that Krender and his crew initially dismissed as impossible. Ziravel found herself in a unique position, bridging the gap between the two approaches. She understood the Thraxian systems perfectly but had learned enough about human problem-solving to translate their ideas into terms her fellow Thraxians could accept. "What if we bypass the main power distribution and create a direct line to life support?" Alan suggested, sketching a rough diagram. "That violates safety protocol," Krender objected. "The system is not designed for such a configuration. But will it work?" Lisa pressed. Ziravel studied the diagram. "Yes, it sacrifices efficiency and creates vulnerability in other systems, but it will restore essential functions." Slowly, the Thraxian crew began to understand the human approach. They watched as Joe repurposed a food preparation unit's power regulator to stabilize their air recyclers. They observed Susan recode communication systems to handle navigation functions. What appeared to the Thraxians as chaotic improvisation gradually revealed itself as adaptive problem-solving. Finally, after multiple attempts and adjustments, the main systems of the precise inquiry hummed back to life. "Life support stabilized," Lisa announced. "Environmental controls responding. Navigation partially restored," Olivia added. "Enough for a controlled return to Earth orbit." Krender approached Ziravel as the repair work concluded. "Your human colleagues have shown remarkable creativity," he said, clearly struggling with the concept. "On Thorax, they would not be permitted to modify systems in this manner. And that is why Thraxian ships sometimes fail when faced with unexpected challenges," Ziravel replied. "We design for perfection in expected conditions. Humans design for adaptation to the unexpected." The journey back to Earth orbit took 2 days, with the Convergence escorting the damaged Thraxian vessel. During this time, Ziravel observed something remarkable. The Thraxian crew began asking questions about human design philosophy. They had seen firsthand how it had saved their lives. When they finally docked at the orbital station above Earth, Commander Wright was waiting to greet them. News of the successful rescue had already spread throughout the Space Center. "Excellent work," she told the combined crews. "This will go down as a historic moment in human-Thraxian cooperation." The Thraxian crew would remain on Earth for several weeks while arrangements were made to transport them home. Their vessel would be studied by both human and Thraxian engineers, a rare opportunity for knowledge exchange. 2 days later, Ziravel stood before a mixed audience of human and Thraxian officials in the main conference room of the Armstrong Space Development Center. She had been asked to present her findings from the experimental ship project and the rescue mission. As she looked out at the audience, she saw Alan and the Convergence crew sitting in the front row, offering encouraging smiles. Behind them sat Krender and his science team, their expressions typically Thraxian, controlled and analytical. The Convergence project began as an attempt to understand why human vessels, despite their technical inferiority, often outperform Thraxian ships. "In crisis situations," Ziravel began, "what I discovered challenges fundamental assumptions in Thraxian design philosophy." She displayed images of both ship types side by side. Thoraxian vessels are designed for perfect efficiency in expected conditions. Every system serves a single purpose. Every component is optimized for one function. This approach produces superior performance in standard operations. She switched to images from inside the human vessels. Human ships, by contrast, are designed with adaptation in mind. Spaces serve multiple purposes. Systems have redundancies and can be repurposed. Most significantly, the ships are designed not just as machines, but as environments that support the psychological well-being of their crews. Ziravel showed data from the rescue mission. When the precise inquiry encountered an unexpected anomaly, its perfectly designed systems failed catastrophically. The crew, trained to operate within established protocols, had no framework for adaptation. Yet the Convergence crew, using technically inferior equipment but superior adaptive thinking, found solutions that saved lives. She looked directly at her fellow Thoraxians. My kind designs starships as perfect machines. Humans design starships as living environments that can change and adapt. Both approaches have value. Together, they could create vessels superior to anything either species has produced alone. The room was silent when she finished. Then Commander Wright stood and addressed the audience. Based on the success of this project, we're proposing a joint engineering initiative, a new class of vessels designed by both human and Thoraxian engineers, incorporating the best of both approaches. To Ziravel's surprise, the Thoraxian officials agreed to the proposal. The rescue had made a strong impression. Their species valued evidence, and the evidence of human design effectiveness was now undeniable after the presentation. Alan found Ziravel in the observation lounge, looking out at Earth below. "You're staying, aren't you?" he asked. Ziravel nodded. "I have requested an extended assignment. There is much more to learn about human design philosophy." "I noticed something different in your workspace yesterday," Alan said with a smile. "A plant?" "An experiment," Ziravel explained. "I have observed that humans form attachments to living things in their environment. I am curious if this connection affects their work process." "And the coffee mug with your name on it?" "Another experiment. Personalization of work tools appears to increase human efficiency. I am testing if it has any effect on Thoraxian performance." Alan laughed. "You know, for someone who keeps talking about efficiency, you've picked up some very human habits." 3 months later, Ziravel sat in her newly expanded office at the Armstrong Center. She had been named co-director of the Joint Design Initiative. Alongside Alan, on her desk sat not only the small plant, now thriving, and personalized mug, but also a model of the Convergence. Her workspace was no longer arranged with Thoraxian precision. It had evolved to include elements of human design, comfortable seating for visitors, variable lighting, and even artwork on the walls. These changes had initially felt strange, even wrong, but she had come to appreciate their subtle effects on her thinking process. The door chimed, and Alan entered with a new team member, a young Thoraxian engineer recently arrived from the homeworld. "Chief Designer Ziravel," the young engineer greeted her formally. "Your work has created much discussion on thorax. Some call your new designs inefficient and compromised. And what do you think?" Ziravel asked. "I am curious," the engineer admitted. "Our ways have remained unchanged for centuries. Perhaps it is time to explore new approaches." Ziravel gestured to a chair, a comfortable human design rather than a functional Thoraxian one. "Then you have come to the right place," she said. "We have much to learn from each other." As Alan smiled in approval, Ziravel reflected on her journey. She had come to study why human ships succeeded despite their imperfections. She had discovered that these very imperfections, these concessions to human needs and adaptability, were not weaknesses but strengths. Her kind would always value precision and efficiency. But she had learned something uniquely human, that the most perfect designs were not the most rigid, but the most alive.